Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, June 27, 2018 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts, for the Point of View radio show, the Millennial Roundtable. And so excited that you decided to join us this morning, and this afternoon, rather. And joining me at the roundtable, we've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm doing well today.
So good. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so rich to hear. And then we've also got Kerby Anderson over there. Kerby, how are you?
I'm good. And, you know, if we were on the national broadcast, it is still morning in Alaska and all the other places in California that hear it. But since we're only in Minnesota and Texas, again, it is afternoon.
Well, welcome to Minnesota. Welcome, Texas. We are so excited you decided to join us today, and we've got quite a show for you. I'm so glad that we have Chelsey here, because we have got a ton of work to do relative to some Supreme Court.
No pressure.
So
Wall-to-wall Chelsey today.
I listened to the soundtrack of Law and Order, so I'm somewhat capable of being able to do what you did after 3 years and multiple years of practicing law.
Yes, same thing.
So we're going to be relying a little bit on you, because my competencies will not be up to par. But like I've alluded to, we're going to be talking about a lot of civil Supreme Court decisions have been ruled down. We've got the pro-life cause that really served a boost relative to kind of the free speech in California pro-life clinics. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that case that was handed down yesterday. The Supreme Court also yesterday upheld a travel ban, so we'll be talking about the constitutionality of that. There's a piece at CNN that said, are the justices discriminatory towards religion? Because on their broad-based perspective, one is outlawing Muslims from being able to come here, quote unquote, and the other is in favor of Christians, which alludes to the pro-life cause. We'll be talking a little bit about that, and then the states that are filing for for the immigration separation that was just ruled yesterday. And then we had a huge win yesterday, a huge upset rather. In the New York congressional district, we've got an individual that ended up winning. We'll be talking a little bit about that as well. So as you can see, we'll have plenty to talk about, and we'll also be taking some of your phone calls. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And so let's just go ahead and jump on into it, shall we? We shall.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, Chelsey, tell me everything I need to know right now relative to the Supreme Court. But specifically, let's just go kind of we'll go in my arbitrary order right now.
Okay.
And so let's go with the travel ban. Travel ban has been upheld. We all know that this is the third iteration of the travel ban that came out relative to President Trump. Some are calling this that it was a Muslim travel ban, because it was specifically targeting particular countries that have a heavy influence or have a significant Muslim population. And the Supreme Court, in their decision, despite the fact that the lower courts kind of continued to kick it off, we saw the Supreme Court uphold the constitutionality of President Trump utilizing his executive powers, with executive office powers, to be able to ban certain countries from entrance for a temporary time. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, we've all remember this, at least from probably a year ago when this was news, and then it went away and now it's back. But the bottom line is, in a 5-4 decision with Kennedy, our swing vote justice, really voting with the conservative bloc, upheld the right of the president to secure our borders and to do so through neutral executive orders. So that's really what the holding was. There was obviously a lot of debate because of comments Trump made on the road while he was campaigning. And so that's really where a lot of the controversy came in, and the judges, especially the dissenting judges, got stuck on, where Trump's comments, not relating to the actual order that ended up being passed, but just about Muslims and coming from dangerous countries. And a lot of those quotes that he had, they said, well, this is evidence of discrimination. And so really his real motive is to discriminate against Muslim minorities and keep them out of our country. That's their take on it. But at the end of the day, the law itself was neutral. In these countries, the government showed up and had evidence of why securing the borders from certain countries, how that will help secure our border. And then the act itself that they referred to, the majority referred to, gives the president essentially plenary power, complete power over our borders and everything that tangentially relates to that. And so you're really talking about the immense power of the presidency to be a chief, to be the commander in chief, which is to protect our country. They had evidence showing that our country does need protection.
Yeah.
And this executive order was neutral when it was passed. The verbiage of it was neutral. And that's important because, if the verbiage of the actual order itself was Muslims are not welcome, that's a different discriminatory intent than just saying we're here to secure our borders. And so that's really the debate at hand. That's both sides at hand. But it was definitely a 5-4 victory to say that the president has a lot of statutory and constitutional power in this area.
And Kerby, it reminded me of a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the Masterpiece Cake Shop and the Colorado Civil Commission. And when they handed down, they used kind of that inflammatory language.
That's right.
And that's where the Supreme Court really went after them because that type of inflammatory language was just incongruent with the law. And so we saw with President Trump, one of the things that we talked about when he first initiated this is we can't deny the fact that he used inflammatory language, which I think we can all agree on relative to kind of talking about Muslims during the campaign. But then when it came to the actual order, that wasn't a part of it. And so we're seeing a distinction that was being made, especially when you compare it to what happened with the Colorado Civil Commission, and then with the actual order was stripped of some of that religious language. Again, just making sure that there's a distinction to be made between rhetoric that happens on the campaign trail and actually what gets put into law.
Well, and again, I appreciate the fact that they're making that distinction. I wish they would make it more often because, as I've said on this program many times before, I wish we'd stop looking at motive. Motive's important in a criminal justice case. Was it a premeditated murder? Was it a manslaughter? But sometimes motives get all mixed up in the whole discussion. We can look at presidents that had really bad motives that came up with good policies. And I can see all sorts of presidents over the years that had the motive of trying to improve education that come up with some really crummy educational laws. So let's just look at the law itself. And if you looked at the law itself, and I love the Chief Justice at one point saying, the Korematsu case, which is, of course, the Japanese internment case, has nothing to do with that. Just leave that aside, folks. And everything the president said, leave that aside. Does this make sense? Well, if it's a Muslim ban, why is it that only 5 Muslim countries are listed? There were 8 overall, and Chad's been removed now, so 7. But 2 of the other countries are North Korea, which is not Muslim, and Venezuela, which is not Muslim. We have 50 majority Muslim countries, and they're not on that list. Indonesia has more Muslims than any other country in the world, and it's not on the list. India has lots of Muslims. It's not on the list. Saudi Arabia's not on the list. So it can't be used as a Muslim ban, as it's described. And more importantly, back to what Chelsey said, Article 2 of the Constitution, that should be sufficient, I think, to say that the president has that authority. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with the president or not, he certainly has that kind of authority. And then if you look at all the other rulings that have come down in that case, the Immigration and Nationality Act and all the rest, I think this was wisely ruled. And I just still do not understand how it ends up being a 5-4 decision. I know that you'll never get Ruth Bader Ginsburg to agree with anything, but this could have been just as easy a 7-2 decision, just like the one that came out of Colorado a couple of weeks ago. But nevertheless, 5-4, still a win.
So Kagan actually in her dissent made the point that this is just like the Colorado Baker case. So I think that's a good point to say we need to distinguish these issues and what. So the actual statements that Trump made, I've got some quotes here. Again, not Chelsey. Trump. Oh, we'll come back and I'll give you the quotes.
I can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm waiting on bated breath. So you be sure to come back. Chelsea's going to give us some quotes that he made from the campaign trail and then how important it is to be able to rule by the law that's actually in the books. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Mention celebrity suicides and you immediately think of Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, and Kate Spade. Talk about teen suicides and you think of the lost potential of young people. After all, it is the third leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. Every day, at least 123 Americans die of suicide. It is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Depression is one reason, a psychological disorder that affects nearly a fourth of American adults in a given year. And only half of all Americans experiencing an episode of major depression receive treatment. It is also true that more than half of those who commit suicide had no history of mental health problems. Troubled relationships, substance abuse, health issues, and financial woes are some of the other challenges that contribute to suicide. Sociologists document that people are more isolated than ever before. On the other hand, we may be more connected virtually through social media, but that's not the same as face-to-face interaction and friendships. Families, churches, and social groups can provide an answer to the suicide epidemic. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." We should take comfort in that verse, but also be the hands and feet of Jesus to reach out to those who are crushed and brokenhearted. Parents also have an important role to play. Asking your child about suicide does not cause suicidal behavior, but can provide a caring and empathetic conversation that might save his or her life. They should look for warning signs. One study found that 4 out of 5 teen suicides were preceded by clear warning signs. We're living in the midst of a suicide epidemic. That is why each of us should be watching for any cry for help and attention. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on today, this Wednesday, June 27, 2018 day. We've been talking about how the Supreme Court upheld the Trump travel ban, and we were talking about the distinction that must be made between the campaign rhetoric that President Trump, I should say, or then candidate Trump rather, said on the campaign trail, as well as various other media outlets, versus what was actually in the third iteration of the travel ban that was before the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court yesterday upheld. And so one of the distinctions, but also something that we wanted to highlight, Chelsey in particular had, is the quotes that President Trump said on the campaign trail to kind of push back against the idea that potentially they're not we'll just let Chelsey say it.
Sure. So we're talking about the difference between this and the Baker case, and why is this not a double standard? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, Trump's statements were, he talked about a complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States because Islam hates us. Again, Trump's quotes, not Chelsey's quotes, and that having problems with Muslims, we're having problems with Muslims coming into the country. Most of these quotes, although Justice Roberts himself said we can denounce these statements, we can view these statements as very negative or derogatory or what all they are. They make waves. But they still might be rooted in the genuine intent of the role of the president to protect our country. Mm-hmm. And that is different than saying your religious views, you're a bigot because you're a Christian. Mm-hmm. There's a difference there between saying, we still have a security interest. And then, of course, the Chief Justice said the other difference being that we have to consider these statements, but also the authority of the presidency itself to make this kind of executive order and to make immigration laws and protect the borders. And there's obviously an immense amount of power given to the president to do just that as the commander in chief.
Yeah. And so, again, it's just, again, the distinction that has to be made is between the rhetoric that happened on the campaign trail and media and then actually what was in the actual ban. And I think that's an important distinction that has to be made. And the court, again, ruled, regardless of whatever the personal vendetta might be, let's just look at the law for what it is, the letter of the law, not the heart behind the law, and allow that, because that allows a sense of less arbitrariness to be able to move in. Because, right, Chelsey, at the end of the day, we need our laws to be objective. We just need them to be, that's the solid foundation upon which economic flourishing can happen, human flourishing can happen. And when you have just this influx relative to the law, it just becomes very problematic.
Yes. I mean, I will say, though, as practicing in constitutional law, we do often look to the intent and the hidden agendas of public officials. And that is because public officials can make facially neutral laws all they want and still gerrymander them in a way that gerrymanders out my Jewish synagogues out of the state of New York. I mean, so you can have facially neutral laws with a lot of malice and intent behind them. And that is unconstitutional. But here, we have to look at what was his genuine intent. And that is a part of the question. And ultimately, it is to protect the country and secure the borders. And whether he stated that in a great way or not, also the statements were made long before the executive order ever comes out. So the judges look at all of this.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, let me just come back to say, in this case, intent is harder to prove when 92% of all Muslims come in this country versus 8%. And in just a minute, when we go to the NIFLA case, I think you can then say intent was obviously intentional because they constructed it in such a way to make sure that no Planned Parenthood clinic, no medical clinic, only pro-life clinic. So I will agree that sometimes we have to look at intent, but when 8% of the entire Muslim world is affected by this and 92% is not, then that's when I think the argument that there was some Muslim animus, can I use a Kennedy word here? Remember that animus issue, because that was his argument in Obergefell, right? The whole issue of same-sex marriage. Well, these people had some intent. So I don't care if they did or not. Is marriage one man and one woman or isn't it? And so this is what when you go down that road, start looking at people's intent, you can come up with all sorts of justifications for why a particular law is unconstitutional, when if you looked at it objectively, you would come to a different conclusion.
And then it kind of moves onward. Now that we know that the Supreme Court has ruled that the President Trump has the ability to ban particular countries for the sake of national security, it does cause us, it raises the question now from a congressional standpoint as well as from an executive branch standpoint. Okay, this is a temporary travel ban. How can we come up with a system whereby we can start getting, because we're a nation of immigrants, how can we honor our past by allowing a systemic but also a safe and equitable system whereby immigrants can get in, and we're just not banning and putting up significant walls? Now, we can get into the whole point of walls. Walls is probably the wrong illustration to use for this purpose. But again, this is this is like just a temporary ban, correct? This is just a temporary ban. And so it just, again, is the call on Congress now. We need to get stuff in order, and we need to figure something.
And not to forget that the goal here is to make sure that the systems we have in place are adequate vetting systems, and that many presidents in our history have exercised this plenary power in a lot of ways. So there have been a whole host, and there's a huge history here of ways that immigration systems have been put in place to just ensure that our country is safe, that those entering here are genuine asylum seekers, genuinely fleeing, violence at home, things like that. And so just making sure those systems are working.
Yeah. And again, as we continue to see day in and day out relative to the news, the world is getting increasingly more dangerous. And so it requires us to continue, one, to make sure that we can keep the border safe as best as we can, but also, two, to try to recognize we need to bring some type of order into this, which brings us to the next case. Chelsey, help us understand NIFLA. I just even like saying NIFLA. It just sounds fun to say, but help us unpack what happened with the Supreme Court yesterday.
I am excited by the Supreme Court right now. This term.
You should be. 5 to 4.
Yeah.
I know, but you know what? Kennedy has not on a single opinion this term aligned with the liberal bloc.
Isn't that
Not
amazing?
one.
And Rush
almost a
Limbaugh was
miracle.
talking about that today. The liberals are going to be saying, "What happened to our guy Kennedy?" You know, maybe it's all these federal judges that have been going against the president that have caused him to say, maybe we should pay attention. But again, 5-4, and NIFLA, just in case anybody doesn't know what that stands for, the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates. They have 135 pro-life pregnancy centers in California.
Yes. So I love this case because this is the kind of case I come across, or statute that I come across constantly in my line of work, that you want to challenge, and this is the result you want. And it came out of course, California, where essentially California said that only pro-life pregnancy resource centers, so not those who offer abortion, but only those who don't offer abortion or termination services, they have to essentially market or advertise for free government abortions. And they said, we think that women who are in trouble need to know that there are abortion services available, and the state will provide those at a discounted rate. So again, biased in the way they apply it. It only applies to pro-life, essentially Christian pro-life centers. And they're having to advertise for abortion services, although they've probably dedicated their lives to saving children. And so the Supreme Court held adamantly that this is a massive First Amendment violation, that it's rooted in, again, viewpoint discrimination. They're discriminating only against those who are pro-life, forcing them to advertise for government, and that is compelled speech, and that's unconstitutional. So a really great victory out of NIFLA.
I think one of the things that I was particularly pleased with is just some of the language that was used relative to it, kind of in Justice Kennedy's opinion. He compared California to a relentless authoritative regime. I thought was so good. And then probably one of there's two more quotes I'll use. The best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market, and the people lose when the government is the one deciding which ideas should prevail. I thought that was such a great little line. But probably my favorite, which was probably the most, what I would consider the most pointed, and also just a stinger, is the act was part of California's legacy of forward thinking, but it's not forward thinking to force individuals to be an instrument for fostering public adherence to an ideological point of view they find unacceptable. I'm like, pow, 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 pow.
Gorsuch like that one too.
It was like really pushing this forward. Like, one, the government cannot compel this type of speech. And then two, California, like you said, it was almost as if it was drawn up just to include.
It was.
We see this all the time. And not to mention the fact that it was all under the guise of this is professional medical speech, which it's absolutely not. So really that's what the Supreme Court hung its hat on, was saying this isn't, you're making unlicensed centers say that they're not licensed when they're not required to get one. You know, it's really misleading to the public, and they're not, making people who are having abortions inform them about their pro-life options. So really, I just thought that this was a really great decision. I wish Kennedy's concurrence had been a part of the majority, but the majority talked about tyrants constantly and said that the government, this is an example of tyranny where the government utilizes compelled speech to make you convey their message. That's a big message to all of our Californians out there who should be voting.
Yeah, sounds like Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, just a little.
It's so great. So we've got to jump to a break right now?
We do need to jump to a break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how people can support us, as we're in the last week before the end of our fiscal year. So we'll talk about that. Since we have a break, we'll come back and hear from Vicki Garza talking about how this ministry and this radio program has been so influential. But I need to turn it back to you.
So we've got a commercial break, but then when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about Vicki Garza and then some more Supreme Court rulings. We'll be back right after this.
Nancy was uncomfortable, to say the least. As an introvert, she didn't like controversy. But when she learned that parents were prohibited from seeing the contents of a major standardized test, she knew her responsibilities as a parent needed to outweigh her discomfort. Her daughter turned out to be the only student in her district to opt out of the test, and one of just a handful in the entire state of Texas. But she stood her ground, and the next year, Point of View helped her unite with other parents to make a difference for their children. The world loves to force us into its mold and to mock believers when we resist. Your gift to Point of View is an investment in courage and changed lives. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. Be part of amazing transformations. It all starts with a simple phone call. 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking in to pointofview.net. One day, you were going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. We have been talking about some of the Supreme Court cases that came down over the past couple of days. We talked a little bit about the travel ban that was upheld by the Supreme Court relative to the third iteration of Trump's travel ban, President Trump, I should say, his travel ban. But then we were also talking about the pro-life cause relative in California and how the Supreme Court continued to side with the fact that we should have free speech and that pro-life clinics shouldn't be compelled, shouldn't be forced to advertise for abortion clinics, and really trying to help us understand kind of the Christian perspective in this, but also the legal understanding of this. And so, again, it's holding both of those in hand, wanting to be thoughtfully considerate of the issues, but also helping listeners, and as well as just discussing among ourselves, how should the Christian respond in this? And Kerby, there's other people that have been talking about how appreciative they are of kind of some of what we've been sharing.
You know, the other day I shared about an individual by the name of Joy from California who said she was really never politically involved, started listening to Point of View, got more politically involved, then listening to people like Chelsey, and also, of course, on our Friday weekend edition where we have Kelly Shackelford, began to realize that Christian liberty was in danger, and so she's gotten much more involved. But one of the people in the past who certainly benefited from Point of View was Vicky Garza, who felt that there was just a real need to reach out to young people at SMU and to begin to minister to some of their needs. And let's hear what Vicky Garza said about the impact that Point of View had in her life.
All my life, I always looked for ways to help people, but I would be frustrated because I didn't know how to help. And that's what I learned when I dialed in that day to Point of View. I learned how to help, not only myself and my family, but I also learned how to help others. And it's actually totally changed my life. We have this You Arise ministry now. It was started in January of 2012, and we are refining the model over here at SMU, but the idea is to bring health and wellness resources that are biblically based onto the campus through the RAs, so that when they're approached by students in need and who have some sort of crisis happening in their lives, they will be trained and able. You don't know when you give to Point of View who you're touching and how much that person is going to be able to touch others. And ultimately, it could go out and touch thousands, even millions of people, because you were willing to be a part of this ministry, to invest in this ministry. And I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
Vicky Garza just talking about how this ministry has had such an impact. And when you give, you are helping other individuals make an impact. So you're the individual that we depend on to continue to bring these programs every day. So thank you for your support if you've already supported us. But I know many of you listening this hour actually are hearing this for the first time, since this is a relatively new format in some of the radio stations, since we usually broadcast from 1 to 3. But this 12 o'clock hour is just another opportunity to do so. And let me encourage you to go to our website. If you have never sent a donation in, we would encourage you to do so. If you have, can I ask for a special gift before the end of this fiscal year, which ends on this Friday? 800-347-5151, or the website is pointofview.net. And Nick, thank you for interrupting for just a minute, because if nothing else, we depend upon our listeners to continue to support this ministry.
And we are so appreciative of Vicky. For sure, I had the pleasure of eating dinner with her probably, I guess 6 or 7 months ago. She's just a phenomenal person, and exceedingly grateful for her. But so let's go back to the pro-life case, or I guess I'm going to call it the pro-life case. It's layman terms, Chelsey. It's layman terms. So we'll go back to the pro-life case and help us understand. So it was a big win. It was a closer win than I think I would prefer, in that it was only a 5-4 decision. But it was very interesting and illuminating to see the dissenting opinions, i.e. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in that.
Yes, well, you're right. A 5-4 on this issue is a little surprising, especially because this is the most historically pro-speech court we've ever had. Mm-hmm. So usually they're actually deciding a lot of speech issues, even almost unanimously. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So when it comes to pro-life, it really just goes to show you how quickly people will bail on your First Amendment rights, which is exactly why we have them. I mean, we have speech rights to protect us from this exact thing. When it's a controversial area, when maybe, Christians are in the minority on an issue, to really protect minority factions from, tyranny of their governments. So really, this is just our laws doing exactly what they're meant to do. I think the opinions address that. The minority opinion, the dissenting opinion, what they did was they really wanted to talk about how this was just the same as any other licensed professional in the medical field would have to give certain medical advice. But the truth is, there was no medical procedure occurring to render advice. But her opinion actually in the immigration case is the one that really surprised me as far as, and I don't know if Kerby, if you have a quote from her in the dissent of this one you want to talk about, but the immigration case
tell me about it.
Was highly polarizing, highly politicized, and something I've really, frankly, never seen a judge or justice do.
Really?
And so, yes, I mean, I was shocked. I think it was definitely outside the character and nature and respect of the position that she's in. And that was, she basically openly chastised Trump and made very political comments. And she quoted some of the things he said on Twitter. One of the quotes was, "We need a travel ban for certain dangerous countries," which, as we talked about earlier, is mostly a comment about the security of wanting to protect our country, which is the commander-in-chief's job.
Yeah.
And she says, "Let the gravity of those statements sink in. Most of these words were spoken or written by the current president of the United States." Talking about how the government has tried to launder Trump's statements and all of the evidence points in one direction. I mean, that is a scathing, politicized comment from what's supposed to be a neutral justice in the judicial system.
Wow, that's so illuminating.
Okay, so she wanted one quote, this one a while back, but where she was talking about Trump says he's a faker. He has no consistency about him. He says whatever comes into his head at the moment. He really has an ego. How has he gotten away with not turning over his tax returns? On and on and on and on. So again, these are not comments that occasionally show up, but it is something that is not the decorum that you would expect from a Supreme Court justice, right?
No, I mean, we trust our judiciary to be the neutral arbitrators of our law. And so we know that politicians are passing the laws, whether they're going to be conservative or Democrat leaning. The president's going to be in one party or the other. And it is the job of the judiciary to neutrally analyze the constitutionality of those laws. And so that is always disconcerting as an advocate for me to see a judge just so blatantly telling you. I mean, we know what side they're on in general, but they're really supposed to try their best not to do the opposite of everything that she drafted in her dissent.
Yeah, it's almost as if they're wearing their team colors, and there's a reason why they're draped in black robes, right? And so,
well, and it discredits, frankly, the judiciary in her opinion. It discredits her legal analysis to say this is coming from a very biased place because, frankly, she clearly does not like Trump. She does not endorse anything about Trump.
It's very fascinating, and it's illuminating too, because again, we're continuing to hear murmurings like this. So obviously, there was a Supreme Court ruling that was landed down this afternoon, or rather early this morning, about the idea that that unions do not have the right to force government employees to pay the fees rather, to be able to join the union. And but one of the bigger news that comes out of it outside the ruling is that we heard no retirement announcement. So apparently right now there's been no retirements after this session. And so it does bring up a good point of eventually there's going to come the time. We've got a lot of older justices that are on the bench right now. And there is the propensity after a time, I think we can all feel it to a certain degree after a period of time that you're working, that you eventually retire. And some of those justices that are up there in age, that would be around that retirement age, have more of a kind of a left bent or centrist bent, right, Chelsey?
That's right. I mean, they're all over. I mean, they're getting over 85 now, but Ginsburg is definitely not going to retire on a Trump watch. She's not going to do it. But Kennedy, there's been rumors for many, many terms now that he's always on the brink of retirement, that he's tired, that he's winding down. I mean, it's my understanding he's even talked to his clerks about it. But at the end of the day, he just never seems to retire. And so I do think that after he hasn't aligned once with the liberal bloc this entire term, I think he's still maybe going back to his Republican roots. And the rumor is that he was appointed by a Republican and that he would want to be replaced with a Republican nominee. So hopefully, that would be true before Trump goes out.
That's actually what some of my colleagues say. Oh, he's coming back again. He's
Here we
coming
go.
back again. Except I'm nowhere near retirement age. That's actually what Kerby says as soon as I walk in the door. He's like, oh, he's coming back again.
The man of the minute. Let me just, we've got only a minute left. Let me just say on this union case, one of the things was kind of interesting is you might remember this is the second time they've listened to this case because it was a 4-4 split because of the death of Antonin Scalia, and so it was 4-4. Well, in the oral arguments for this case, guess who said nothing? Well, obviously Clarence Thomas, but Neil Gorsuch did not say a thing. And that's why I think everybody got surprised because they thought, well, maybe. Nope, he voted as one of the five. And so, of course, 5-4, 5-4, 5-4. This is pretty good for liberty, pretty good for preventing compelled speech, pretty good for life. I think we're doing okay this week.
Well, contra to, I'm being compelled right now to speak and tell you that we have to take messages. And so after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about that union case, but also some of the political ramifications that happened yesterday. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Whether it's Tim Tebow, Coach Joe Kennedy, or the thousands of players taking a knee together in prayer after a game, prayer seems to be a popular theme around football. At Wrights High School in Evansville, Indiana, the players value prayer rather highly, it would seem. That became controversial only when a picture of the players gathered in prayer landed on the front page of the local newspaper. Activists sent the school district an angry letter threatening a lawsuit should the school officials refuse to take action. According to them, the coach was violating the law because the picture showed him surrounded by his football players and everyone appeared to be praying. But let's break down that picture a little closer. Yes, the coach was in the center, surrounded by his players, but it clearly shows the players with bowed heads and hands laid on the coach, led by one player whose lips are forming the prayers. The players were praying for their coach. Activists would have this coach stop up his ears and run screaming from the scene of this religious activity, but common sense and the Constitution would call this hostility to the free exercise of religion by the players. Students have a First Amendment right to pray for their coach, and the school cannot legally stop their religious expression. Thankfully, that's precisely what school officials told the activists. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman, and we have been talking about Supreme Court, and specifically everything from the travel ban that was just handed down yesterday, or was upheld yesterday. The ruling was handed down to the pro-life case that was coming out of California. The Supreme Court continued to rule that you could not compel pro-life kind of health clinics, pregnancy centers, to be able to advertise for all intents and purposes, abortion clinics during their services. But then also, what was just handed down earlier this morning was a ruling about unions and how these government employees cannot be forced to pay union dues. And again, it kind of goes back to that whole theme of free speech. The government continuing to be, or not the government, the government, but the Supreme Court specifically continuing to champion this First Amendment right of free speech, Chelsey.
I mean, really, yes, it's all with the understanding that there's a whole host of ways the government can use and mechanisms the governments can use to really infringe on your rights and on your conscience. And they can do that through, taxing. They can do that through now compelled union fees. They can do that through speech requirements for advertising. I mean, there are a whole host of ways governments are constantly, even sometimes accidentally, forcing those that they govern to really, they're getting in an area that they don't belong in. And this is just continuing to push back against those ideas and principles and understanding that once you give the government an inch, sometimes they'll take a mile.
I love the Jefferson quote. It says, to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical, coming straight from old TJ's mouth. And so just, again, the importance of that. And it really does. Again, it moves towards this idea that our words are weighty. They're pretty significant. They're pretty important. And that's why our beautiful government, our shared project to be able to enshrine these rights, continues to try to protect some of these rights. But one of the things that's very interesting, and we alluded to it in the previous segment that we can point to now, is the idea that our judges are getting a little bit older now, and there's beginning to be more and more theories and speculations concerning retirement, which makes it very interesting, Kerby.
Well, again, let's give the numbers, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 85, Kennedy, which you mentioned just a minute ago, 81, and Stephen Breyer, almost 80, 79. And so you have three individuals, and especially Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's had health issues. It wouldn't take much for her to step down, but she just, if she can try to avoid that, does not want to step down, knowing full well that Donald Trump is going to put another person on the court, probably like Neil Gorsuch. So that's why they're holding on a little bit longer. And let's be fair, the health of most of these individuals is so good that they're going to be there for a long period of time. As the old one around the table, I remember some times when we had Supreme Court justices where they had to nudge them every once in a while during the oral arguments because they would just literally fall asleep. They would stay there much too long. They would stay there past their expiration date, if you want to say it. But so far, we're doing better. And again, the intellectual firepower of Breyer and Kennedy on each side. I've read some of their opinions. I'm sure you've read some of their dissents. They still look pretty lucid to me. So I don't think they're stepping down anytime soon.
I think they'll be around for a while, unless for, a political expediency's sake, Kennedy says, okay, I was appointed by a Republican. I want to be replaced by a Republican nominee. These justices also have maybe a benefit that others did not, and that is they have the list of replacements. So, Trump has published his top 21 list of replacements. He's sticking to the list, so they know. Many of these are circuit court judges that their opinions have either been upheld or overturned over the years. So they know their colleagues, they know their replacement list, and if they don't like someone on the list, I think it'd be likely they'd hold on.
To mention one more thing, and Kelly talked about that on Friday, but let me have you talk about it today, Chelsey. That is, if you look beneath the Supreme Court to the circuit court and especially the district court, this president has put a lot of conservatives on there, people that I even wrote about James Ho the other day. You know who he is, for example, and his first opinion out of the box on the Fifth Circuit Court. And these are just outstanding individuals. And I found that sometimes when I travel, people say, well, and they start talking about the Supreme Court. And I said, okay, it's going to be a while before we see somebody else in the Supreme Court. But you look at the so-called farm team, unbelievable. That has changed dramatically. And if you want to understand that, there was a time, let's use the Fourth Circuit Court, because you'd like the cases coming out of the Fourth Circuit Court, including the Bradensburg Monument, to go to the Supreme Court. That used to be a court that was relatively conservative. but the Fourth Circuit Court has been packed with all sorts of Obama nominees, and it's now almost as liberal as the Ninth Circuit Court. So it shows you what can happen in 8 years.
Oh, 8 years is an immense amount of time, or tremendous. If I were President Trump, I would say tremendous amount of time.
Huge time. Huge amount of time.
When President Obama entered office, I think there were only 2 or 3 conservative circuits out of 13, and by the time he left, there were 9 out of 13 turned liberal, and so or appointed, highly liberal judges. That's enough to change, our jurisprudence for a lifetime or more. So I think that Trump definitely understands, what's at stake here with the judiciary. He ran on that issue. He's been faithful on that issue. And the people he's put in place helping him choose judges are really vetting and doing their due diligence. Now we just need Congress to vote them.
Yeah. And so I think in here, I'll give you a lead up to this. Like, I'm wondering if I'm a listener right now, you've seen such a significant number of opinions that have been handed down and rulings that have been handed down this session. I would be interested to know, what should listeners be thinking about relative to the next session? What are some of those issues? What are some of those, just the importance of continuing to have judges that are more conservative in nature, that aren't interpreting relative to the heart of the law or the spirit of the law, but really to the words of the law? When you think about those issues that are going to be looming in the next session or right down the line in 5 years, 10 years, based upon your expertise and competence, what does that look like for our listeners?
That's a big question. I think, they're still accepting cert petitions. First Liberty Institute, personally, our organization has 6 cases being appealed to the Supreme Court right now. And then the court hasn't granted cert on a lot of cases yet. And so we're still waiting. The jury's still out, so to speak, on what those cases are. But you can go to firstliberty.org and see what our top issues are when it comes to religious liberty issues and speech issues. We've got everything from cross-shaped memorials that are 120-year-old memorials being torn down because they're in the shape of a cross to school prayer, Christians not being allowed to pray over a loudspeaker at a Christian state football game in Florida. The cases run the gamut. We've got coaches who are fired for praying at the end of a football game. Really a ton of issues. A woman told she couldn't pray in her own home by police in that home. So you should just go to firstliberty.org and look up some of our issues, and then, obviously be praying that the Supreme Court grants cert.
Okay, Kerby, question to you now. When you think about it from a year, when you think about it from 5-year perspective, what are some of those big issues that listeners need to be thinking about relative to kind of the legal landscape here in the U.S.?
I think we're going to see some more where you have, let's take some, I'll use California as my whipping boy for just a minute. They have one that says you can't basically promote anything that would allow people to have change in their sexual orientation, that case, or this one that came down just the other day that now forces public universities to have on-campus abortions. So some of those cases are going to go there saying, do you have the right to force these kinds of issues? And I think some of these zoning cases are going to surface. We talked the other day with ADF about that case that says we have the right to tell you, even though you have a coffee house, that you cannot have a worship service in there. And those kinds of cases are going to come down more and more because they're not going to be the big cases about prayer. They're going to be those local jurisdiction cases that say, do you have a right to zone a church out of a jurisdiction? Do you have a right to say you can't even have a home Bible study? And I suspect those will be some of the cases we're going to be seeing in the next couple of years.
Well, that is coming from the experts, and that is not coming from me, even though I'm not an expert. I'm not even going to joke about that. Okay, so we are going to have to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the primary elections that happened yesterday. Some big changes are going to be happening, and it's going to have some national implications, and so you're going to want to stick around, but we'll be back right after this.
Yep.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call. 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host today, Nick Pitts, on this Millennial Roundtable here for the second hour of Point of View on this Wednesday, June 27, 2018 day. And I'm joined at the roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson, and I'm at a loss for breath almost.
Something just happened.
Just literally broke right now. And let's go ahead and let's just share the news right now. Breaking news: Justice Anthony Kennedy is retiring effective July 31st. Has sent his resignation letter. So Chelsey, help us to understand this. Good night.
Well, wow, we are. I mean, that's very, very exciting news. If you are a Republican right now, to know that Justice Kennedy will be replaced by a Republican nominee. He himself was appointed by a Republican, and there have been rumors for years and years now that he would retire, and then even more rumors this year that he would want to be placed by another Republican nominee. And so I guess those rumors were true, because it's official now that he is retiring, which means President Trump, he has a short list for Supreme Court nominees that includes about 20 nominees. All of them, First Liberty Institute has taken a look at their backgrounds and a lot of research, and they are all stellar candidates, constitutional originalists, very good conservative options for us to replace him with. And we know that Trump will pull directly from that list. And so it appears, if we can get Congress to vote on a Supreme Court nominee, that here in the next couple sessions, we should have a new Supreme Court nominee.
And so, according to his office, we'll give the quote. He said, quote, "It's been the greatest honor and privilege to serve our nation in the federal judiciary for 43 years, 30 of those on the Supreme Court." He added that while his family was willing for him to continue to serve, his decision to step aside was based on his deep desire to spend more time with them. He said, too, that admiration for his colleagues on the court means that he will retain warm ties with each of them in the years to come. Justice Kennedy was nominated by President Reagan and took his oath of office on February 18th, 1988. Kerby, this is pretty significant news, and like what Chelsey's alluded to, the list of individuals that President Trump has said are potential nominations it's a pretty stellar list when you think about it, right?
Well, it certainly is. And again, I was around when he was the third choice, because you first had Judge Robert Bork, who was borked. Then you had, for a short period of time, a man by the name of Ginsburg, no relationship to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who then stepped down because he'd smoked marijuana, which now I don't think would be a deal breaker, but back then was. And so then he was the third choice. And an individual that has been the swing vote for many years. You had some others that were the swing vote, but more and more he became the swing vote. And on certainly issues like Romer and Obergefell, which has to do with, of course, issues of same-sex marriage or homosexuality, he certainly went the other direction. But as we've seen over the last 48 hours or so, he has been the fifth vote in all these cases, whether it was the travel ban, whether it was NIFLA having to do with abortion clinics, or whether it's the more recent decision coming down today on the union. So he is leaving, having left his mark, and certainly Neil Gorsuch has left his mark on those. And, of course, being the second oldest at 81 years of age, the only older one is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who probably is not going to step down anytime soon. This might give Donald Trump a chance to have a more consistent vote, because in some cases, Anthony Kennedy has been the vote that has been the swing vote. The Constitution sometimes is whatever he thinks it is on that particular day. And as Chelsey points out, and as you point out, a stellar group of nominees. one of those will probably be picked. And if you thought the battle for Neil Gorsuch was a significant battle, you have not seen anything yet.
As the great Michael Buffer said, let's get ready to rumble. Leonard Leo, who serves as kind of an informal advisor to President Trump, he's the vice president or executive vice president, one of those two, vice president at the Federalist Society, has released a statement as well. He says, quote, "I expect the nominee to be just like Justice Gorsuch, to demonstrate excellence in every respect and to earn widespread support from the American people and bipartisan support for confirmation." And Chelsey, you've been privy to that list, and as well as First Liberty and Kelly Shackelford and others. And it really is. It's very much a list that I would assume that our listeners, individuals that are very much for the rule of law, would be something that would be very favorable for them.
Yes, very, very favorable. You know, President Trump again he composed his list. Based on his campaign promises. Okay, He promised this on the campaign trail, and he has been faithful to continue to build that list out in a way that's consistent with conservative values and ideals. A couple of things that all of his nominees, a couple characteristics or background traits that they all possess. A lot of them have a history of public service. They all have proven track records, which means these are not first-time justices. These are judges who have been on circuit courts for years and years. Their opinions have been tried and tested. We know where they stand on constitutional issues, and we know that they're tied to originalist backgrounds. So kind of the mantra is that we want, no more swing vote justices out of the Republican parties, no more justices that surprise us with joining the liberal bloc on clearly constitutional issues. And so I think every single judge is really has excellent backgrounds and academically and otherwise. And so I think everybody should rest at ease that Trump is going to have this nominee if we can get Congress to vote. Okay, which brings us to a very significant point, and I'll open it up to either of you if you want to answer. It's this understanding. So we've got these midterm elections that are going to be coming up in November right now. Is it possible that this next nominee, one, could be named since there's already a list, and two, is it possible that it could go before Congress before the midterms? Or do we think that we're rushing? And then we got to consider the political implications for this. Kerby, since you were the first one to breathe. Oh, no, we had Chelsey breathe too. Okay, you guys go. One of you two. Okay, well, Ed Whalen, who follows all things Supreme Court, he's an academic, says that he thinks that President Trump will announce the nominee mid or late July. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing could take place in late August. Senate is set to remain in session in August because we know they had to give up their vacation time. And then the final vote could be earlier, mid-September, which would be plenty of time before the court's next term, which actually begins October 1. So not just the election date calendar that we have to think about, but the term calendar. We also need to think we need 9 justices for the next Supreme Court term, which starts October 1st. So really, they could get this pushed through quickly. We already have the list. They've already been vetted. It's ready to go. So it wouldn't be too quick to ask for a nominee that in that short amount of time.
Again, you have to, as you said, vet it. And it's not so much vetting in terms of the other issues, but just it takes longer because of all the forms that you have to fill out. So even if he announced it tomorrow, you've got only a short amount of time before then you get into the summer recess and the lack. And I don't know. It's possible, but I don't think it's likely that it happens before the Supreme Court convenes again in October. But you never know. It's always a possibility.
So now we move into yet again another election where we're going to have a Supreme Court justice that is going a Supreme Court seat that's going to be vacant, much like the Merrick Garland, the Scalia seat that was vacant. Except this won't be the presidential election. This will be a midterm election.
Let me just mention, I'm going to have posted in here just a minute the list of those nominees that because we've got the complete list, so I'll just have it posted here on the website, Point of View, in case you'd like to see who are those individuals, and then we can take a bet around the figure out who's the likely candidate. I don't know who that is, but it will be interesting to see because we have the list. We know what he's probably going to pick from, so it's just which one of those, I guess 21, that he might pick to actually put on the court.
Well, we are going to have to take a break, but if you'd like to call in, ask your question, you can call in at 800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Mention celebrity suicides and you immediately think of Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, and Kate Spade. Talk about teen suicides and you think of the lost potential of young people. After all, it is the third leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. Every day, at least 123 Americans die of suicide. It is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Depression is one reason, a psychological disorder that affects nearly a fourth of American adults in a given year. And only half of all Americans experiencing an episode of major depression receive treatment. It is also true that more than half of those who commit suicide had no history of mental health problems. Troubled relationships, substance abuse, health issues, and financial woes are some of the other challenges that contribute to suicide. Sociologists document that people are more isolated than ever before. On the other hand, we may be more connected virtually through social media, but that's not the same as face-to-face interaction and friendships. Families, churches, and social groups can provide an answer to the suicide epidemic. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." We should take comfort in that verse, but also be the hands and feet of Jesus to reach out to those who are crushed and brokenhearted. Parents also have an important role to play. Asking your child about suicide does not cause suicidal behavior, but can provide a caring and empathetic conversation that might save his or her life. They should look for warning signs. One study found that 4 out of 5 teen suicides were preceded by clear warning signs. We're living in the midst of a suicide epidemic. That is why each of us should be watching for any cry for help and attention. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey, Youman, as well as Kerby Anderson. And we have breaking news in the past segment that was just released that Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court is retiring effective July 31st. As mentioned in his retirement, mentioned in the statement that he wants to spend more time with his family and will also maintain friendships and relationships with those on the court. And again, this is kind of a shock wave for us. We weren't anticipated talking about this, but one of the things that we've gone ahead and done is on our website, pointofview.net, there is a list of individuals that President Trump has gone ahead prior when he was putting together potential individuals to fill the Scalia seat. He came up with a list. Leonard Leo helped with that reportedly. Put together a list of individuals that they would potentially draw from. And one of those individuals that they drew from is Neil Gorsuch, who is now on the bench now. And so we've gone ahead and posted that onto our website, pointofview.net. And we're also going to be opening up the phone lines for you. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to hear relative to this huge breaking news that we're just processing right now, you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And we're also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can share a question or comment from there, and we will share that over air as well. Kerby, big news.
Okay, midterms. You ask a question. First of all, I got a list of the hit list for the midterms in the House of Representatives, but let's go for just a minute. Chelsey, I'd love to get your comments on this. What about the midterms for the Senate? Now, all of a sudden, that becomes another question. You ask a Senate candidate, if indeed that candidate, that nominee is put forward, then it's a very legitimate question to ask whether it is Senator Tester, Senator Heitkamp, whoever it might be, are you going to vote for this particular nominee that Donald Trump has put forward? And that changes things, because I've only been around a few times when you've had a nominee being put forward just before an election. So there is some wisdom, perhaps, if Donald Trump acts fast enough to then make the nominee one of the issues for whether or not you vote for or against a U.S. senator in the Senate races come November. So that's something else to think about.
Yeah, that's a pretty big, because right now it's a pretty small margin right now the Senate has, Republicans have in the Senate, and we think about some of those closely contested races right now, the three that continue to come up where there's close polling. You've got a Senate seat that's occupied by a Republican right now in Tennessee, and Bob Corker. Bob Corker's resigning. Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen, the former governor of Tennessee, mayor of Nashville, is leading in the polls right now. And so will that seat switch over to a Democrat? You've got Dean Heller right now that's in Nevada. That's trailing as best we can tell in some of the polls right now. So it'll be very interesting to see if Nevada loses that Republican seat to a Democrat. And then obviously Missouri is a potential swing because you've got Claire McCaskill. In a fascinating twist, unfortunately, Claire McCaskill's rib was broken earlier last week because Joe Manchin gave her the Heimlich maneuver.
Wasn't that
during the lunch? And so, which is weird, unfortunate, but it happened. So all that to say, Claire McCaskill's in a very closely contested race with Josh Hawley in Missouri right now, and has the potential to flip that. And then it goes back to West Virginia again. We've got Joe Manchin, and then you've got him going up against Patrick Morrisey. Manchin is up in the polls pretty significantly right now. It's close to double digits. I don't know if it is double digits or not, but there's still a lot of room. And all the magic number right now, Chelsey, is 51. The only because
and
of what
I mentioned
happened.
Two others. I mentioned Montana and North Dakota.
Yeah.
Again, Tester and Heitkamp. And so again, I mean, you just don't know. And, but all of a sudden, that takes a few of never-Trumpers who are maybe not that thrilled about some of the tweets by Donald Trump and saying, well, even so, I got to pay attention to who might actually be on the Supreme Court.
So we've gone ahead and posted that list of potential individuals that President Trump could nominate to the Supreme Court. Chelsey, as you're looking through this list right now, help us make sense of this. So I see Mike Lee is on this list, who's the senator from Utah right now. We can pretty much just cross him off, right? He's already said that he doesn't want to be considered. Yes,
he publicly said he doesn't want to be considered. Now, of course, if you are approached to be a Supreme Court justice for the rest of your life, I mean, there's very few greater honors than someone entrusting the judiciary to you for a lifetime appointment. So, I don't hold people too much to their former statements, but this, again, I'll get back to the excellency of the candidates on this list. All conservative originalists is the number one thing that Trump and his team are looking for, which means a proven background. I mean, the internal mantra there in D.C. is, we don't want any more swing vote justices out of Republican nominees. We want tried and true conservatives, which means they have a judicial record, they have opinions that have been scoured, and these are the final candidates that have that amazing and stellar both academic background but also conservative backgrounds. Many of them have been recently appointed to circuit courts. So Amy Coney Barrett's in the 7th Circuit. We know Brett Kavanaugh's in the D.C. Circuit. And they've been, the D.C. Circuit is what some say is kind of the Supreme Court training ground. Scalia came out of the D.C. Circuit. So I wouldn't be surprised also to take a look at some of those circuits that are really where the Supreme Court draws heavily from their nominees. But overall, again, just really stellar candidates. There are some U.S. District Court nominees as well as state Supreme Court nominees, and so you really have a lot to choose from. Don Willett, who was on the former Texas Supreme Court but is now at the 5th Circuit, is on the list, and he is a very good conservative judge as well, who, as I mentioned, has many opinions for you to glean. He really has a jurisprudential ideology developed.
Yeah, and so we're just following this as it's breaking. So President Trump has told reporters, according to CNN, that he will select a Kennedy replacement from the list of 25 he's released previously. And Maggie Haberman of the New York Times is reporting that sources say Trump will move quickly on the Kennedy replacement in hopes of confirmation being done before Election Day this year. So according to her sources, they're hoping to be able to make this happen before Election Day, which
means we have 51 Republican senators to hopefully, if they hold the block, if we have no one turn, make that happen. And I think it's important that that does occur, not just because there are so many seats up in the air for November, but because if you guys recall, after Justice Scalia passed, the Obama nominee was stalled for the election year. And again, that was only 1 year. It was at the end of his term. We knew that he would have a replacement, but the Democrats have been waiting and getting back at us really for that. And they have obstructed so many votes on our judiciary, and so many nominees are waiting in the ranks to get voted on at the district and circuit court levels that I have no doubt in my mind they would try to stall this for another 2 years so that we can't get a Supreme Court nominee should Trump lose. So really there's a lot at stake here, and I don't want to undercut that by just saying, well, we hope it happens before November. It's like, well, if we lose enough seats after November, we truly could be looking at no replacement on the Supreme Court for a few years.
This is pretty significant, Kerby, especially for many listeners, just because the Supreme Court justice was the main rationale as to why, especially white evangelicals, main rationale as to why they voted for our current president right now.
I would think so. And again, as I said, if this nominee is put forward before the election, which I think probably will be the case, whether he or she would be confirmed before the election would be another issue. If the Trump administration right now is huddling and saying, okay, we want to have somebody that might be easy to get through. Chelsey mentioned Brett Kavanaugh. He's already on the D.C. court. He's already been approved by Democrats. Of course, they could turn right around and say, well, it was one thing to put him on the D.C. court. It's another thing to put him on the Supreme Court. Or if they say maybe now is the time to put a woman on the court or somebody with a different ethnic background, maybe something else. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And if you've noticed, this president doesn't usually let grass grow under his feet. So we might have a decision coming down a lot faster than usually have happened in the past.
Sure, he has Fox News on speed dial right now for the announcement.
So we may know before the end of this week or the end of this month. Who knows? We'll find out.
I mean, and all of this is happening according to reports that he is bringing on Fox News co-president, Bill Shine, as his new communications director. That announcement was supposed to come today. Who knows if that will actually come now because this big news. But now we're hearing news that according to Sam Stein, Ted Cruz has told him that the Senate should confirm a new secretary or a new SCOTUS justice before the midterm elections. And so
we'll see.
The pressure is mounting. And
Yes.
So we are going to have to take a break, but we'd love to hear from you. So we're going to open up the phone lines. That number is 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. What do you think the president should do? Should the president hold off and wait, or should the Senate continue to move forward with this? Do you have any thoughts relative to Justice Kennedy stepping down? We'd love to hear from you. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or hop on over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be sharing your comments that you leave online over the air. So you in Facebook land, go right underneath there, leave a comment or a question, and we'll share that, what you share online, over the air. But we're going to have to take a break right now. But when we come back, we'll continue talking about this late breaking news as well as what happened last night relative to the primaries. We'll be back right after this.
Ronnie fixes cars in a shop on his property. That allows him to earn a living for his family and be home to help care for Michael. Ronnie and Judy adopted Michael more than 20 years ago, knowing he would never walk or be able to care for himself. But through listening to Point of View, they were convicted that every life God gives is precious. So even though Ronnie is now 69 and Judy can't lift Michael anymore, every day is a labor of love and a testimony to their faith. Providing for their family isn't easy, and yet every month for almost 15 years, they've invested in Point of View. Some listeners have changed their communities and the nation. Ronnie and Judy changed everything for Michael. Your gift to Point of View in June is an investment in changed lives, and a matching challenge provides double the impact if you give in the next few days. Please give now, 1-800-347-5151, or visit pointofview.net. Make a difference for the future. That future is now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We've been responding to the news, just breaking this within the hour of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy resigning effective July 31st, opening up a seat on the court that will potentially could be filled before the midterms if President Trump, based on his early announcement, his desire would be that it would be filled before the midterm election. Well, just to get a kind of a recent history significance of the position and the significance of Anthony Kennedy on the bench right now, we had three cases in recent history that just went 5-4 just within this past session. So we've got individual relative to the travel ban that Anthony Kennedy upheld President Trump's ability to and wherewithal to be able to enlist a travel ban. We've got the pro-life case that came out of California, where the Supreme Court ruled again in a 5-4 decision with Anthony Kennedy being in the majority that pro-life clinics, health clinics, pregnancy centers do not have to, for all intents and purposes, advertise abortion in those pro-life clinics. And then we also had I'm blanking on the third one. Oh, the unions. The unions that was just ruled this morning, where government employees cannot be forced to pay union dues for the sake of cannot be forced to pay union dues. And so it's just very interesting. Again, all these are freedom issues, they're free speech issues, and so the significance of Anthony Kennedy is something. And so now we're moving into a session whereby President Trump, who's already identified his list and put out that list and already said on record to CNN that he will pick from that list of justices that's very well vetted by the Federalist Society, by First Liberty Institute, that they're all solid choices out of that list. And now there's a push to be able to get this to happen before the 2018 election. But if yet last night, again, this is all happening within 24 hours. So if you slept in too late this morning, welcome to the, and then you consider what happened last night. And so last night, really what we continue to see is I would argue, a movement afoot relative to Democrats to move further to the left with a shocking upset last night, where you had an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ended up winning. She's a 28-year-old, ended up beating the number 5 Democrat in the House of Representatives. This 28-year-old that still has college loan debt. I mean, just a very shocking, is a self-assessed, self-identified socialist, ends up winning. She got outraised 10-1, but she ended up beating her opponent by 15 points, the latest that I just saw. Outraised 10-1 since June. Her opponent spent $1.3 million. She only spent $130,000. Just a significant move, and she is a self-identified socialist. Welcome to 2018, y'all. Welcome to Chelsey.
Today is a big day. I mean, I don't even know where to start. Other than I will say about Justice Kennedy that he was appointed, as we talked about, by President Reagan, and he voted actually with the quote unquote conservative bloc of justices on every single case this term. He did not, even in a 5-4 decision, part with the conservative bloc and align with the liberal bloc. So he really, truly, we've heard a lot of rumors that he would ultimately want to be replaced by a Republican nominee to take over his shoes. He considers himself a Republican and conservative, at least. And so this is consistent with what we've heard. And it's very exciting to know that Trump will have the opportunity to have an excellent lifetime appointment on his hands. The short list is 21 judges. All of them have a stellar record. The White House has been vigilant in making this list. It's a list we've had for years, so none of them should be surprises to any of our listeners, although it might have been a year since you've heard about it. Mm-hmm. But all of them have a stellar conservative record, opinions that have been vetted for originalist judges that will lean in an originalist way, so that really we're hoping to not have any more surprises out of our nominees. And I think that if he sticks to the list, which he no doubt will, we'll have a really great justice coming out of the end of this.
And now, speaking from the Senate floor right now, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said, quote, "We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall. It's imperative that the president's nominee be considered fairly." And so there appears to be a movement afoot. The kingmaker himself.
You did mention this surprise vote in New York, and let me try to drive home for just a minute how unbelievably shocking this is. 2 months ago, Politico wrote this: Representative Joe Crowley, buoyed by the caucus thirsty for change and his rising national profile, is angling to become the next House Democratic leader if Nancy Pelosi and other top Democrats fall short. So he was the number 4 leader, but some people felt that he might have been the odds-on favorite for Speaker of the House. Probably not, but possibly. So you have one of the most powerful members of the Democratic caucus in the House defeated by a 28-year-old self-described socialist, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And now, again, Joe Crowley has actually taken on some very liberal positions. One of those, for example, single payer, which means universal health care. And yet he was actually out-liberaled by the socialist who went on to say, yes, not only do I believe in a single-payer plan, but I believe in guaranteed income, and I want to abolish ICE. I want to abolish immigration entirely, which is pretty outstanding. Now, for people that, by the way, think that this is going to then result in a Republican victory, this is a district that is a plus 29, which means the chances are slim and none. Actually, none, the Republicans, which means essentially then that this socialist is in Congress.
Joining Bernie Sanders.
And actually, in some respects, making some statements that even Bernie Sanders has not made. We have never seen anything quite like this before. I'm from Berkeley. I have seen it in Berkeley, but they weren't elected. I see them running. I saw we had socialists running all the time in places like Berkeley, but I have never seen something like this. And so this is just really pretty remarkable. And if that's a preview of coming attractions, it's going to be a really interesting November set of elections.
I wish I could say I was surprised, but after our last election, I refuse to ever be surprised by politics
Hard to be
again,
surprised about anything anymore, isn't it?
Yes, but the truth is, we have to remember this is New York. This is liberal capital of our country. Besides California, I think there's no limit to what we've seen. How out of touch Democrats think about it. Who operates our media? Our media outlets are largely liberal, based out of New York City. So for me, it's really not that shocking. It's shocking that she's breaking all the rules, right? She's so young, she spent so much less money, and the incumbent had so many terms under his belt. But at the end of the day, the fact that someone this liberal is coming out of New York, I think, shows really how polarized our country is when it comes to politics right now. I mean, people are really backing into their corners.
Yeah, so there's 3 characteristics that continue to accentuate potentially what some are arguing is the reason why she had her success. One is that she reflects her district. It's a very multi-ethnic district. It's largely, very largely multi-ethnic. She is a Latina herself, and so many individuals thought the ethnicity component played into it. There's the second part where it was a Bernie district already, and she was a campaign organizer for Bernie Sanders during the 2016 election. So she already had some of those built-in ties. And then 3, they're arguing that it was a low voter turnout. And so during a low voter turnout, the incumbent, it cannot go. It doesn't always go well for a incumbent in low voter turnout, especially when you have such an activist grassroots base that Bernie Sanders was characteristically known for during 2016.
Yeah. But again, as you guys are millennials, talk about this because she is a millennial, and she went down to the immigration headquarters and went outside the detention facility and made some really strong comments. And don't you think that it seems like she picked up a lot of the millennial vote there as well? And the issue of immigration right now is certainly an illustration of how it played in her favor, even though I'm sure Joe Crowley wasn't necessarily agreeing with anything Trump said. But again, it's the throw out the rascals, let's get in some new blood. And maybe that was a thought as well.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that you'll see this. It's just the sense that there was a sense of I think we're frustrated. I think President Trump just epitomizes that. We're frustrated with the status quo right now. And I think she ushers in a very different face, a very different kind of set of ideas to try to disturb the equilibrium in the system. I think what will continue to be interesting is that does she continue to channel the voice of the people, the Vox Populi? She's been very all the things that I've heard thus far, and it kind of goes back here in Texas as well. There's an individual that's running right outside of Austin right now. Is it Hegler? MJ?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She has a great campaign ad that really is trying to challenge the status quo. I think it's going to be very interesting just because millennials are distrustful of the establishment, one, and very much I guess prone, I would say, to want to disrupt the status quo.
I agree that that's their sentiment, but getting them to the polls is another story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which I think is another reason why it was just so important. She got her people invested and got them to the polls, because at the end of the day, it's not how much money you got, it's how many votes you get. So we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Whether it's Tim Tebow, Coach Joe Kennedy, or the thousands of players taking a knee together in prayer after a game, prayer seems to be a popular theme around football. At Wrights High School in Evansville, Indiana, the players value prayer rather highly, it would seem. That became controversial only when a picture of the players gathered in prayer landed on the front page of the local newspaper. Activists sent the school district an angry letter threatening a lawsuit should the school officials refuse to take action. According to them, the coach was violating the law because the picture showed him surrounded by his football players and everyone appeared to be praying. But let's break down that picture a little closer. Yes, the coach was in the center, surrounded by his players, but it clearly shows the players with bowed heads and hands laid on the coach, led by one player whose lips are forming the prayers. The players were praying for their coach. Activists would have this coach stop up his ears and run screaming from the scene of this religious activity, but common sense and the Constitution would call this hostility to the free exercise of religion by the players. Students have a First Amendment right to pray for their coach, and the school cannot legally stop their religious expression. Thankfully, that's precisely what school officials told the activists. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We were talking about the election yesterday. Kerby, it was so fascinating just because you saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming out and beating, I guess it was a sixth term. It was a sixth term. Joe Crowley. And just not just a simple beat. I mean, just really walloped him by 15 points. And even though she got outspent, it really does show the power of not only, the numbers might not have been in her favor relative to she got outspent, she got outraised, But at the end of the day, she was able to have the momentum to get people to actually vote. And it just reminds us of the significance and the need to vote in today's world.
Well, and again, I've said this before, and people misunderstand it. I say politics is more about intensity than it is about numbers. Now, let me clarify that ultimately the numbers win, but intensity matters. And Chelsey and Nick, think about this for just a minute. If you're running a campaign, especially in a congressional race in New York City, you are really dependent upon individuals putting up posters, or in the suburban area putting up signs and knocking on doors and making phone calls. Now, if you're running for a Senate campaign, then you can use television and a variety of other things. But most of these various elections, with the exception of the Senate elections we just looked at a minute ago, these are all pretty much local elections, even congressional elections, and they're not ones where you're buying too much media. It's still back to the old ground game. It's going out there and knocking on doors. It's handing out flyers. It's meeting individuals. It's putting up posters. It's putting up signs and those kinds of things. And those individuals who have that intensity sometimes can completely overwhelm other individuals that maybe are part of the, if you will, the Democratic or Republican establishment. And I think she just illustrated that. And then, especially in a primary where there's a low turnout, that then does give the challenger, in this case, the advantage. And she took advantage of it. And I sincerely doubt that a Republican's going to win in this district, because it's what's called a plus 29D. So that's,
that's above the margin of error by a little bit.
So she will be in Congress, and given the fact that she essentially was elected in a small primary vote yesterday.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
And so you bring up two themes that I think is really important. I'm going to come back to you for. You bring up intensity and then getting elected to Congress. And when I think about those two things, especially in recent history, I think about Michelle Bachmann, to say the very least. She is an individual that not only was intensely passionate for her positions, but also had a keen ability to be able to get support around individuals. And one of those she not only got the support of the people, but she also was very supportive of certain organizations.
Well, and again, as we come to the end of our fiscal year, we did want to, from time to time, highlight some of the people that have had such an influence in politics or influence in starting a pregnancy resource center or influence in starting a Christian school. One of those is Michelle Bachmann. She's been a good friend of this ministry, and as you'll hear in just a minute, she has been listening to Point of View for quite some time.
I was about 19 years old when I first met my husband, and he brought me out to the farm in Wisconsin where he lived with his parents. And every day at noontime, the radio came on, and my in-laws had the radio tuned to the Christian radio station, and it was Marlon Maddox's Point of View that came on. So I was still getting my footing for my faith. And this was very important, because what Point of View taught me was the intersection of current events with my faith in Jesus Christ. And I just loved the show. I loved Marlon Maddox's personality. He was cutting edge. All the new things that you'd hear about in the news, he would be talking about on the radio station, but from a biblical worldview perspective. He very profoundly shaped a lot of my thinking during that time, and we couldn't wait to listen to it. Kerby does such a fabulous job. I've enjoyed being on the show with Kerby. It's needed now more than ever, because it seems like too few pastors are willing to say from the pulpit what they need to say today. That's why I think that Kerby Anderson, what he's doing on Point of View, is probably more needed now than ever, because we need to be hearing this on the radio if we aren't going to be getting it from our pulpits.
Some great comments from Michelle Bachmann. Of course, one of the things that we love to tell the story is Penna Dexter and I interviewed her one day when she was just a homemaker and was interested and concerned about some of the educational issues. And that as back in the early 1990s. Then she decided eventually to run as a state representative in Minnesota. And then, as we well know, later ran as a member of Congress, and then even ran for the presidency. So, again, starting at the age of 19. And one of the things we certainly want to continue to do is educate and equip and empower individuals to make a difference. So if you have not already taken the time to visit our website, pointofview.net, you can see that you can click on the button that says donate. And I might just mention we have a matching fund. So that means that if you would like to give a fiscal year-end gift of $100, it becomes $200. $200 becomes $400. But whatever you might want to do, we certainly encourage you to visit the website pointofview.net. Or, of course, you can call the pledge line off air, and that number is 800-347-5151. And Bob will give the number in just a minute, but that's one of the reasons, Nick, that we from time to time talk about our financial support. One, because we do need our financial support, but also it has been fun over these 30-plus years I've been doing the broadcast and 45 years since Marlon started this to see individuals begin to develop their expertise and go on to positions of influence and authority.
That's great. And one of the things that we do want to do is hopefully, one, to be able to inform you of the issues, but two, to help provide context for the issues. And so, especially when we think about right now, this Supreme Court case, or Supreme Court, not just the cases, but also now the vacancy, it's important for us to understand it's the president that nominates and then Senate confirms. Right, Chelsey?
That's right. That's right. And we're on some pretty tight deadlines here if we're looking at it. The Supreme Court next term will start October 1, but obviously November is when the elections are. So Trump has a short list of 2021 tried and true, proven, brilliant, intelligent conservatives that he has already guaranteed to the American people that he will pull from. Gorsuch was a nominee off that list. And I think that Gorsuch is a prime example of the type of nominees that Trump is looking for. And his administration has already vetted. And that's someone with a proven track record to be a constitutionalist who understands really Gorsuch's opinions really indicate a deep and intellectual understanding of constitutional rights and some of the nuances of those rights. So I think we're going to look at another nominee potentially even in the next month. One would be nominated that would embody those things. But then, of course, it will go to the Senate Judiciary Committee to have a hearing, and then finally the Senate to vote. And so it is key that the Republican bloc stay together, and even just as important for everybody listening to go vote in November and make sure you maintain your Republican senators just for this very reason.
So it'll be very interesting because, again, when you think about the elections that are coming up, currently right now the Senate holds, the Republicans hold 51 is what I believe.
Yes.
But you've also got Senator John McCain right now in Arizona that hasn't been in Washington right now. Of course, he's going through cancer treatments right now. So his health is in very much a great frailty. And like we mentioned earlier, Tennessee has a senator, Bob Corker, right now that's resigning, and the Tennessee race is very close between Phil Bredesen and Marsha Blackburn. We've got West Virginia right now. West Virginia is being held by Democrat Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is leading Patrick Morrisey by a pretty significant margin right now. And so then you also have Missouri. Claire McCaskill is your incumbent right now. She's up for re-election. You've got Josh Hawley that is challenging her, and that's a pretty close election from everything that we can tell. And then we've also got Nevada right now as well. In Nevada, Dean Heller is currently your senator that is up for re-election, and he is in a very, very, very close race. And so,
right. So just to break it down to sheer numbers, we have 51. Historically, the party in control of, with the presidency loses 6 Senate seats in the midterms. We need to keep at least 2 to keep our majority.
Yeah, and so we are going to have to take a break. But then when we come back, we'll talk more about the political landscape. What are some of the opportunities? What are also some of the pitfalls, as well as just what does the landscape really look like? But we'll be back right after this.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call. 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View for this third hour of the Millennial Roundtable. And I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about, during the first hour, we kind of overviewed some of the Supreme Court rulings that came down, everything from the pro-life cause out of California, where the Supreme Court ruled that pro-life pregnancy centers cannot be forced to advertise for abortions in there. And we also talked about how the Supreme Court upheld the travel ban, as well as the Supreme Court said that government employees cannot be forced to pay union fees, as well as then we transitioned, which was fascinating because in the last block we talked about how some justices, they're getting older in age and they potentially could be retiring. Then over the break, and what we spent the last hour talking about is the breaking news that Justice Anthony Kennedy has announced his retirement effective July 31st, which just so happens to be my birthday. I guess we're going to have a joint party together. And so so Justice Kennedy is going to be, he was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1988, and now he will be stepping down. And President Trump, as we talked about during the last hour, has said it's his plan to be able to nominate someone from the list that was so publicized that he drew Neil Gorsuch from. And also Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader, has said that they will try to confirm this individual before the midterm elections in November. And my goodness, it took them 7 years to not repeal Obamacare, so we know that they're having a bill. Never mind, sorry, that was a bit bitter. So we've got a lot going on, which leads me to an interesting question, especially when we consider what happened last night. What happened last night is there were a number of primary elections that happened, but specifically the one that's getting most of the attention is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ended up upending a six-termer out of New York, and even though she was outraised 10-1, she ended up winning by 15 points. And this inevitably raises the question, which I'd be very interested to hear from you all, as well as from our panelists is does the fact that there's going to be a vacancy on the Supreme Court potentially during the 2018 midterm election, does that draw more Republicans or more Democrats to the polls? And so I'm going to be posing that to the panelists, but we're also posing that to you as well. So you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Also on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. We would love to hear your comment, your question that you would have. But the question I'm posing right now is, does the fact that there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court effective July 31st, do you think that has the propensity to turn out more Democrats that are hesitant towards an individual that might be confirmed and appointed by conservatives? Or do you think that pulls more conservatives that have continued to show that the Supreme Court holds a significant weight in there? We're going to be talking about it, but we're also taking your phone calls, 800-351-1212 or Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. Chelsey, your turn.
If this is anything like 2016, Republicans will turn out in droves on this issue. I mean, Trump, truly, he ran on this issue. For many Republicans and part of the constituency, they only showed up to vote for President Trump because a Supreme Court nomination was on the line. So let me just frame this out as to how big of a deal this really is. This is a lifetime appointment. Every single judge on his list is, as I've talked about many times, an intellectual, brilliant, conservative, proven conservative on the track record, which means they're currently serving as a judge or justice. They have opinions that have already been analyzed. They're also very young. This is a very young list. And so we need to remember that this has the potential to change the makeup of our entire jurisprudence and all of our constitutional rights for at least a lifetime, and the rest of my lifetime, most certainly. And so very important. I think that conservatives continue to stay strong and come out and vote on this issue. We know Trump will pull from the list, and that if all of his nominees are just similar to Gorsuch, it's a similar vein of tried and true conservatives. So liberals are going to be motivated, but I think that conservatives have got to show up in November.
Kerby?
I think this is the gift that keeps on giving to at least some of the Republican candidates for the Senate. And let me pick two, because you mentioned Tennessee, and you're from Tennessee, and you know only so well that Marsha Blackburn is looking at this hill trying to climb because she is dealing with a governor who is very well known. But that, I think, helps her with her constituency. Let's go to North Dakota, for example, and you got Kevin Kramer, who's already ahead of Heidi Heitkamp, and that helps as well to say, okay, that will push me over because I can say to all the Republicans and anybody else that believes in some of these issues that I am going to confirm this nominee rather than my opponent is going to oppose this nominee. So we've really never had anything quite like this. I was just thinking back over it. You know, Justice Kennedy came in after the midterm elections in 1986. Since I'm the old one around the table, let me talk about that for just a minute. And that's what hurt Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan won in 1980. Ronald Reagan won overwhelmingly in 1984, but then a lot of Republicans sat back and they lost the Senate in 1986. And so as a result, no longer did he have the ability when, first of all, Judge Bork was put forward. And as a result, he was actually pushed away. He was borked, as I said. And, of course, everything from the famous speech by Ted Kennedy all the way down. And so eventually you ended up with Kennedy. But this was after the midterm elections. I cannot think of a midterm election where there was a nominee on the ballot in a sense, not technically, but realistically they are, because every Senate campaign now is going to at least spend part of its time, if not most of its time, talking about whether or not you're going to confirm or whether you're going to deny that particular nominee. And I got to believe that's got to help a few Republicans that are out there, whether they're in Tennessee or West Virginia or Nevada or North Dakota, wherever it might be. Those are close races that I think all of a sudden got a little bit of more energy. And it might even help a person like Ted Cruz in Texas. You know, last time I looked, he was in a lot tighter race than many people would have thought of.
So here's my argument, and hear me, and I'm just going to end the hour. So Montaigne said that there is nothing more boring than a conversation in which everyone agrees. So for the sake of argument's sake, I'm just going to disagree with you.
Well, that's fine.
So here's where I would argue is the reason why Democrats are going to go to the polls more than Republicans. One, President Trump is not on the ballot. I think at the end of the day, when the president typically tends to carry a significant amount of weight when it comes to going on the ballot. So when President Trump's on the ballot, you're not going to have those traditional Trump voters that have not voted, that were not polled going into 2016, aren't going to be going. I would argue historically aren't going to go to the ballot. Second, history is not on the side of the individual that's in the race that won the presidency. As you've alluded to, Chelsey, the Senate falls by 4 seats. As in the House, it goes anywhere from 25 to 35 based on the number you're reading. History is not on the side. And then you've got momentum standpoint. All these special elections that we continue to see have either been they're making up margins where Democrats are making up double digits that they've traditionally lost, or they're winning, i.e. Doug Jones, that you're saying that a Democrat is actually winning in Alabama. And then, so I just think that those three things, which you're continuing to see, is the momentum's not on the Republican side, history's not on the party and power side, and President Trump's not on the ballot. And I know Chelsey is about to brim.
Something to say
she
about
wants
that.
to argue about all of that. But we've got to go to a commercial break, but we'll also be taking your calls, 800-351-1212. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Mention celebrity suicides and you immediately think of Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, and Kate Spade. Talk about teen suicides and you think of the lost potential of young people. After all, it is the third leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. Every day, at least 123 Americans die of suicide. It is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Depression is one reason, a psychological disorder that affects nearly a fourth of American adults in a given year. And only half of all Americans experiencing an episode of major depression receive treatment. It is also true that more than half of those who commit suicide had no history of mental health problems. Troubled relationships, substance abuse, health issues, and financial woes are some of the other challenges that contribute to suicide. Sociologists document that people are more isolated than ever before. On the other hand, we may be more connected virtually through social media, but that's not the same as face-to-face interaction and friendships. Families, churches, and social groups can provide an answer to the suicide epidemic. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." We should take comfort in that verse, but also be the hands and feet of Jesus to reach out to those who are crushed and brokenhearted. Parents also have an important role to play. Asking your child about suicide does not cause suicidal behavior, but can provide a caring and empathetic conversation that might save his or her life. They should look for warning signs. One study found that 4 out of 5 teen suicides were preceded by clear warning signs. We're living in the midst of a suicide epidemic. That is why each of us should be watching for any cry for help and attention. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman, the First Liberty Institute, and Kerby Anderson. And I was just telling Chelsey how much I like it when we argue back and forth one with another.
He loves being wrong. It's just so interesting.
I just like being challenged, and I think it makes for good radio. So
Yeah,
it
it
gives
is good radio.
competing
Yes,
viewpoints, and hopefully there's civility. Now, do we both of us hold these positions? No, we're willing to argue those positions, and so hopefully it's a robust and demonstrations of a civil conversation where you can agree with one another and hopefully still be friends. But eventually I'm going to just continue to beat her, and she's not going to want to be my friend anymore. But nevertheless, that's probably hypothetical dreamland. But we were asking the question, now that the news has broke that there will potentially, unless the Senate fills the Supreme Court justice seat or confirms the Supreme Court nomination that President Trump hands down, there will be a vacancy on the Supreme Court during the midterms, the 2018 election. Now, for our purposes, President Trump says it's his intention to pick a nominee, and for the Senate to have to vote in favor of it, which is 51. Right now, the Senate sits at 51 Republicans, but we also know John McCain is not there to vote right now because of health concerns. That's not to say that he wouldn't be there for health concerns when the vote comes, but that's just the reality of the matter right now. And so we asked the question, and we posted it to you all as well, would the fact that there is potentially going to be a vacancy on the Supreme Court, is that going to do more to turn out Democratic support, or is that going to do more to turn out Republican support? And so my argument was it will do more to turn out Democratic support. The reason why is because President Trump is not on the ballot. President Trump was able to draw individuals into the democratic process, this electoral process that typically have not been engaged in that before. And you kind of heard the common refrain: my voice was finally heard by President Trump. So the fact that he's not on the ballot, I think you continue to lose some of that. You at least lose part of that support. Second is history is not on the side of the party that's in power right now, and so typically the party in power loses in midterm elections 4 Senate seats. They lose 25 to 35 House of Representative seats, and then finally momentum. What you continue to see is special election after special election after primary after primary, that Republicans are losing the gap, at the very least. They're losing the gap of what they traditionally win by, and in some instances, the Democrats are actually winning. And so there shows the momentum is on the side of the Democrats. I'll call that the Doug Jones wind, in honor of the Democrat that surprisingly got elected into the Alabama to represent Alabama in the Senate as their junior senator. So Chelsey, now that I've recapped, rebuttal.
All I'm hearing out of you, Nick, is the difference between causation and correlation. That's it. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing, historically, the party in control during midterms loses 6 Senate seats on average. So that, you're right. History is on your side that the Democrats will take seats, but I don't think that this is going to particularly motivate them out in droves to vote in the same way now that conservatives should be motivated to get out and vote. And I think there's a massive part of our constituency who voted for Trump singularly on this issue because Gorsuch would be the nominee and other nominees like him. And so I think if anything, all of our listeners should be very highly motivated and excited to get out there in November because we've got a lot at stake. And I can't overstate it really that liberals elected in November and really who are currently sitting will obstruct the nominee if they get the opportunity to. So I'm hoping there's a vote before November. I'm hoping a justice is voted on and confirmed before the election because make no mistake, the liberals will slow walk it like we've been seeing them. They've obstructed the judiciary for 2 years now, and you better believe they're going to hold out and hope for a different president next time who's going to have a Democrat nominee. So there's a lot at stake, and I think that conservatives understand that. I think they love Gorsuch as a choice. He's a great conservative constitutionalist, and so they'll be motivated to show up maybe even more now than they would have otherwise.
Kirby, any contributions that you'd like to say outside of declaring me the winner?
Okay, I'll declare both of you winners because you both have very good arguments. And one of the things that is the big question mark is, okay, let's assume that we do put forward a nominee, and then the nominee runs into some trouble, either manufactured by the opposition or maybe a self-inflicted wound because somewhere along the line in some decision they made some kind of statement that goes across the Me Too movement or the abortion movement or something like that. And then you have just the opposite taking place. I can't believe as a Republican nominee you say you would actually confirm this nominee. Let's hope that they don't have that kind of problem. But that's another kind of question mark that, of course, none of us can answer because we don't know who the nominee is right now. But if nothing else, back to Chelsey's point, it does give a face to all of this. It's one thing to say, we need to continue to elect Republican senators because they have a chance to appoint people to the federal bench. Well, people like Chelsey and Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dice, they know who those people are. The rest of us, we don't pay as much attention. But when you have, if indeed you elect this Republican senator, or this person to the Senate as a Republican, he or she will vote for, and this particular nominee, it gives a public face to that individual, and that's something that we have never had that I can remember. I'll go check this a little bit later, but this is the first time I can remember any time in recent history where you've had a Supreme Court nominee put forward during a midterm election, because if nothing else, that really shows the gravity of the vote in November. Maybe that helps. It could help both sides, but it certainly would help the Republicans.
So if I just look at the profile of this program, there's the part that it's more conservative bent, but also the part that there's the evangelical bent towards this. And as I look at some of these Senate races where there is going to be individuals, and so particularly the Senate races I'm thinking about right now is West Virginia. I'm thinking about West Virginia, Tennessee, Missouri, Nevada, and North Dakota. There's only one of those where it's going to be a heavy evangelical population.
That is true.
That's Tennessee.
And
so those
and maybe
others,
Missouri.
maybe Missouri.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see two constituencies, and I think these constituencies would represent the right and then the left on this. Relative to the right, evangelicals. Do evangelicals turn out? Seriously, this is their issue. This is their issue.
That's why they voted for Trump.
Many evangelicals turned aside and held their noses when they went into the ballot box in order to vote for President Trump because they believed to be true that he was going to put a person that was pro-life on the bench. And he fulfilled that promise, as we all heard. So the evangelical constituency block, one would say, is going to be significant for the right, and so it's going to be very important for them to get out that particular vote. But then on the left is going to be important for millennials, I would argue, because millennials typically are much more gravitated towards voting in the left when they're younger. And what we're seeing is not just that millennials are younger, but also conservative millennials, because of their distaste for President Trump, are either one, becoming apathetic and not participating in the process, or two, are voting on the left side. So I think it will be very interesting to see if the left will be able to get out the millennial vote. And just to give you an idea of how the millennials, just because I've done some research on this, how millennials turned out in the 2016 election, only 1 in 4 actually voted. You wouldn't know by social media because everybody posted something like they actually participated. That they didn't participate, they just gave their voice but didn't necessarily cast their ballot. And so, Chelsey, I think it's going to be very interesting. Is there a constituency? Is there a block you're interested in seeing the potential? I know, or maybe there's just some aspect that you're interested to see relative to the 2018 election that that might be a turning point for that.
I just want conservatives to show up. I mean, I don't care about a particular constituency over another. I think there are a lot of heated races. There's a lot to lose. I think the pro-life issue is definitely going to be raised before the Supreme Court in the next few years, and having a 5-4 majority is just fundamental to maintaining our rights for the rest of our lives, really. I mean, this is a lifetime appointment. And so I can't overstate enough how important it is. I hope everybody shows up who's a conservative. I hope that Democrats forget that it's election day. That would be beautiful.
Well, we are going to have to take a commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to continue talking about this, as well as just some other, specifically this lack of civility that we're beginning to see take place in the public discourse. We're going to talk a little bit. We'll take some of your phone calls as well, not 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. I'll still be interested to hear callers' opinion. Do you think the vacancy on the Supreme Court is going to draw more from the right or the left to the actual voting box? We'll be taking some of your phone calls after the break, but also we're also going to touch on the lack of civility. We have a sitting member of Congress right now that body slammed a reporter. We've got another member of Congress right now that potentially could be, at the very least, you could say, is inciting harassment against administration officials. There is just a sense that manners know more, and there's a couple of pieces in the New York Times and Washington Post that show politeness has got us to the point where we're at today, and it's undesirable for many. So therefore, they're tossing aside manners and decor, and they are just resorting to violence or inciting violence. And so we'll talk a little bit about that when we get back right after the break. So you stay tuned, and we'll be back right after this.
Ronnie fixes cars in a shop on his property. That allows him to earn a living for his family and be home to help care for Michael. Ronnie and Judy adopted Michael more than 20 years ago, knowing he would never walk or be able to care for himself. But through listening to Point of View, they were convicted that every life God gives is precious. So even though Ronnie is now 69 and Judy can't lift Michael anymore, every day is a labor of love and a testimony to their faith. Providing for their family isn't easy, and yet every month for almost 15 years, they've invested in Point of View. Some listeners have changed their communities and the nation. Ronnie and Judy changed everything for Michael. Your gift to Point of View in June is an investment in changed lives, and a matching challenge provides double the impact if you give in the next few days. Please give now. 1-800-347-5151, or visit pointofview.net. Make a difference for the future. That future is now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Kerby Anderson. We've been talking about the opening now that is on the Supreme Court relative to Justice Kennedy has announced earlier this hour that he is going to resign effective July 31st. And so there will be the opening. And so now there's an opportunity for President Trump to be able to select an individual. And it's been fascinating. I've been checking Twitter during the break, and it's been very interesting to see some of the responses of what's happening right now, but also just
are Democrats crying?
It's very there's heated remarks. I'll put it that way. My grandmother's probably listening right now, and so I can't say some of the things that are being said online. And so there's very heated remarks from both sides of the aisle right now of individuals that are expressing either their joy or their great horror at the fact that President Trump is going to have the opportunity to nominate another justice to the Supreme Court, which brings us to, I think, what is probably, especially for the Christians, should cause much concern right now, is the lack of civility and the decorum that is decaying in the public square right now relative to the public discourse. Now, I'm alluding to the fact that Maxine Waters over the weekend, Saturday, at a rally, was to a certain degree inciting violence, justifying the fact that individuals can protest and can disrupt the personal lives of administration officials simply because they disagree with them relative to the separation of children with immigration or just other policies as well. And if this was just an isolated incident, it would be worth noting, but it would be worth talking about. And we continue to see this to the extent that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, now will receive Secret Service because, again, earlier at the end of last week, a restaurant owner at the Red Hen in the D.C. area asked her to leave the restaurant simply because they did not agree with her, the administration she was associated with. Secretary of Transportation, Elena Choi, was told protesters to leave her husband, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, alone because protesters were right outside of the building that they were. There were protesters right outside of Stephen Miller's apartment, who's the senior advisor to the president, protesting right now. And it's almost, we're getting to a point, Kerby, where the water is boiling, and it seems as though it might flow over and make a mess. And when it makes a mess, it could potentially hurt some people. And it's very distressing right now.
The example I used yesterday is, of course, we played the audio from Maxine Waters, but also the audio from Pam Bondi. Now, this is the Attorney General of the state of Florida, who finds herself in a situation on 3 separate occasions where they're in her face, and that's where it gets really dangerous. Of course, later some of the antagonists played a video and said, well, this isn't what happened. Well, she said, well, that's after the police showed up. That's after the troopers showed up to protect her, and everybody was on their good behavior. But when they're in her face and looking at her boyfriend saying, hey, Blue Eyes, you're going to do something about it, because they're looking for some kind of attack or action. Or when you go to the home of Kirsten Nielsen and play all of this, or you go to the home of Anjet Pai, who is the FCC commissioner, and have the names of your kids there. I mean, at what point is it going to get out of hand? And the bottom line is, you could say that it already has. Sooner or later, and I'm afraid it's going to be sooner, because some of these individuals now have individuals that are providing protection. Somebody's going to at least throw a punch, if not pull a knife or pull a gun or something. And what you want are various leaders to tamp down the rhetoric. Again, I gave partial credit yesterday to the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer. But when you have others ratcheting it up, like Maxine Waters, given our sin nature, what is likely to happen if something doesn't change pretty quickly?
So you did bring up a good point, because I've only highlighted individuals that are on the left right now going after individuals that are on the right. But this is not just a political party issue. Literally, there is a sitting congressman right now that was indicted and charged with assault of a reporter. Why? Because he body slammed him during the campaign. And then what you expect is for individuals, regardless of party, to come alongside and say that kind of behavior is not approved of, is not something that we want to see propagated into the future. Chuck Schumer should be applauded for commenting that Maxine Waters' rhetoric is not condoned. But then you have individuals that are using their position, Chelsey, in leadership, specifically at the New York Times as well as the Washington Post. And I'm not a media guy. I'm not blaming. I hate blaming the media, but I will call out writers when I see them. So Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times yesterday said, quote, "As long as our rulers wage war on cosmopolitan culture, they shouldn't feel entitled to its fruits." That was out of the New York Times. Then you have the Washington Post. You have Tom, I can't pronounce his last name. He argued that such treatment is the right thing to do because civility is a luxury and politeness has guided us in this current undesirable predicament. He says, quote, "If it has value at all, it's as a standard to set your own conduct, not to order others around with them." It's just these are entities that are using their platforms to be able to leverage this kind of incivility that potentially could lead to violence, which is not a part of the Democratic Republic. Right?
Well, it just goes to show the hypocrisy of the left, who has touted themselves consistently as the human dignitarian party. I mean, aren't they the party of human dignity? So why wouldn't you afford that to your opponents? And what's disconcerting to me is, I mean, we have seen this type of behavior before. Usually it's issue oriented. So, in the rise of certain heated, contentious social issues, we've definitely seen, as someone who got off Twitter because of threats relating to religious liberty issues, that's issue specific threats. But this is a wholesale, declaration of war against just some people who belong to a certain party who are going to work. Really, who, by the way, are public servants. I mean, these are governing officials who've taken pay cuts to go be public servants and serve our country and to try to do their best to be a part of the solution. And I can't say that for all of the people who are now threatening and harassing these individuals. Have you left your job to go serve the public and try to make the world a better place? Even if you fundamentally disagree with their ideology.
And the concern I have is, let's look at a few of these individuals, even from a left-wing point of view. Okay, I can get upset with the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. I don't think what they've done to her is appropriate. But I just scratch my head saying, how in the world can you justify going after the Attorney General of the state of Florida, saying you're responsible for the kids that are being separated from their parents? No, she's not. And even if you said that to the Attorney General of the state of Texas, at least you could say it's happening in your state, but that makes no sense. Or Anjet Pai to say, this man has had death threats. He is the FCC commissioner. And even if you are convinced that removing some of these net neutrality rules is the end of the republic as we know it, I'm saying this with a lot of facetious comments. How do you justify that? And that's where I think David French's piece yesterday is good. Where's the limiting principle? Mm-hmm. Once you start down the road, and it sounds like our friends at the New York Times and our friends at the Washington Post, once you say that desperate times require desperate actions, there's no limiting principle. And even if you do not mean violence, some individuals actually take out a rifle and start shooting Republican congressmen at a ball field. And that's where at least some unhinged people begin to start doing some things that maybe you never intended in the first place.
And I think that's a great point. You continue to see that. I know, here's what I think is very important for us to understand, and I'll argue this until the hogs come home. I've been in Tennessee for too long. What we continue to see is that the internet does not reflect reality. We can all agree with that. Right. The internet has loud voices on there that might get a lot of retweets and likes, but it does not reflect reality. When you go into coffee shops, when you go into grocery stores, people are not as angry because there's no produce, and they're not willing to say those things that they say online. The internet does not reflect reality. But what the internet does do is it does embolden certain individuals in order to do things like congressional baseball shootings. It does embolden certain individuals to be able to go to abortion clinics and set off on. The internet does these things, so we need to be very tempered, and we need to recognize that people are still people.
Well, and we're in a wave of an influx of violence in our country, and gun violence, which is something that Democrats are, touting, getting rid of violence and guns, but this is really a declaration of war in a physical way, in a harassing way, in an intimidating way. It's a security issue. And unfortunately, not all of these public officials have security. So it's like, how much are we going to need to expend now to protect them, in their homes and in their place of work to make sure that the crazy people don't have access to them.
Yeah, when you're literally protesting these individuals at their home, like you're not making they can't be private citizens anymore. And to a certain extent, I do agree when you take on a role in the government, there is a level of scrutiny that goes up because you're using government funds. But they still deserve to have some private lives where individuals aren't.
Well, and this isn't protest. What this is harassment. This is border. I mean, this is borderline criminal, if not battery and assault allegations that could arise.
Exactly. So we've got to go and we got to take a break. But we would be interested. Do you think incivility has reached a new level, and what would you suggest as potential solutions to this as well? And so you can call in 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Whether it's Tim Tebow, Coach Joe Kennedy, or the thousands of players taking a knee together in prayer after a game, prayer seems to be a popular theme around football. At Wrights High School in Evansville, Indiana, the players value prayer rather highly, it would seem. That became controversial only when a picture of the players gathered in prayer landed on the front page of the local newspaper. Activists sent the school district an angry letter threatening a lawsuit should the school officials refuse to take action. According to them, the coach was violating the law because the picture showed him surrounded by his football players and everyone appeared to be praying. But let's break down that picture a little closer. Yes, the coach was in the center, surrounded by his players, but it clearly shows the players with bowed heads and hands laid on the coach, led by one player whose lips are forming the prayers. The players were praying for their coach. Activists would have this coach stop up his ears and run screaming from the scene of this religious activity, but common sense and the Constitution would call this hostility to the free exercise of religion by the players. Students have a First Amendment right to pray for their coach, and the school cannot legally stop their religious expression. Thankfully, that's precisely what school officials told the activists. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. For this last segment, we've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson with me in studio. And we have been talking about the incivility in the public square right now and how there's the decaying of decor relative to the public discourse. Do you see all those D's? That was really good of me.
Yeah, that's good. I love the alliteration.
Did you say decor or decorum?
Did I say decor?
I think so.
Thank you. I can't say I've got IKEA on the mind. Those Swedish meatballs. Nevertheless, okay, so we got to get back. Come on, guys, let's do this. We're talking about incivility right now, and so we are going to be taking some of your phone calls as well. Do you think incivility has gotten to a high point, or is this just kind of the past repeating itself? And what do you think are possible solutions? So we'll be taking your phone calls at 800-351-1212 Again, 800-351-1212. Also, Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. And we're going to jump over to Maddie in Georgia right now. Maddie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hey, Maddie, what's your point of view?
Okay, my point, incivility. Yes, I do believe it has reached an all-time high, and it's so regrettable and so sad. And I don't believe that we can place it on one political party. I think both share it. As a matter of fact, I know both share it. And it did not begin with Maxine. Totally disagree with what she has said. There's no sense in it, especially with the climate in America now where people are so fast to shoot and think later and all other forms of violence. But I can remember, I'm 68 years old, that it goes all the way back to that I remember when President Obama was elected his first term, and on the Senate floor, a South Carolina senator yelled across and called him a liar.
Joe
That was the
Wilson.
beginning.
Yep, no, we mentioned his name earlier. Yeah,
That
go
was
ahead.
the first thing, and I thought it was so, but nobody on the Republican side acknowledged that or either called for an apology for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to our president running, the people that he surrounded in the thing of shooing people away if they disagree, get them out of here, incite that kind of thing. And so we have to call everything that's wrong on an equal basis. We cannot be selective. I'm not Democratic or Republican. I don't know where I am now because I'm disgusted with all of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, but I know this one thing, though. I'm a Christian, and I do follow what my word says. And sadly, each one of those elected officials claims to be a Christian, or if they're not, some religion and belief. But you do not see the practice there at all. And that is concerning and discerning to me. I do believe that with everything going on, with all of the shootings we've had, it's all about intolerance that this is happening. And our young people are the ones who are doing this. And I believe that the examples that we put forth in our homes, in our dialogue with people, or even sometimes the monologues, the things that we say through tweets and what have you, really cause this to be precipitated all over because they don't really understand. As the first black, one of the first blacks in Georgia to integrate schools back in 1967, I was met with some incivility, but it was nothing. But around me, even in that situation, I had white teachers who refused to allow me to be bullied or talked down. And I remember them to this day, that they stood up. It wasn't because of color. It wasn't because of political preference. It was because of morality and civility. There are just some things you don't go along with. And we talk about this whole case of immigrants. I think that our president forgets that his wife is an immigrant. And that when we look at illegal, the way that she came over when it should have been for people of a higher ranking, such as scientists, what have you, that was illegal for them to classify her that way. So, but we're okay. She's here. She's a lovely lady as far as I know. But even with the law, we have to have that civility. We have to have that moral obligation. And the law is meant to protect people. Yes, I believe that people ought to wait their turns. I believe that, along with the Republicans, that the social programs, not Social Security, but the other programs, that people who are able to work should be working. Because I'm a taxpayer. I'm the youngest of 7 children whose father died when she was 8, and my mother never received any type of public assistance. We were expected to work. She led the family to work. So again, I think if we take time and take some of the negative rhetoric away, that we can come to a very good place if we remember that we're all really looking for the same thing, and that is peace, comfort, protection, and the best for our families. And that's pretty much, but this incivility, it is so sad from both sides.
Yeah,
It all needs to stop.
Yeah, and Maddie, I completely agree with you. It's just it has gotten to a point where it is just on both sides of the aisle. It's just degrading in the sense that it's not even representing the humanity in each side. And regardless of whatever position they take, especially from the Christian perspective, if the cross teaches us anything, it's that everyone's worthy of dignity and respect, because everyone has been offered the chance to be given the free gift of eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. And at the very least, we might disagree with them, but we're still called to love them, even our enemies, right, Kerb?
Yeah, I love Maddie's comment, too. Here going to be the first individual to be integrated and being protected by those who might have disagreed, but wanted to make sure she wasn't bullied. So just a great illustration of the kind of civility that we used to take for granted in the past and don't have in the current situation. But just before we wind it down today, I am looking forward to hearing what Kelly Shackelford has to say about that. It has been fun to hear Chelsey's comments today. And just before we say goodbye, let me just mention that we're in the last week before the end of our fiscal year. And I thought for just a minute, since we're going to hear from Kelly Shackelford on Friday, we might hear from him now, but he talks about the fact that he really does credit Point of View as being one very significant point in his life in which he began to think about the possibility of doing what he is doing today. So let's hear what he has to say.
When I was in college, when I was in law school, you just didn't hear people talking about current issues and actually applying a Christian worldview. I think it's really important to get young people early on to start thinking about things not only analytically, but analytically with a Christian eye and with the Christian worldview. And most young people, especially most college or law students or whatever, aren't trained to think that way. And so to have something every day that is causing you to think and analyze and look at things always through that Christian lens, the things that we are fighting today, having to literally even defend churches. 23 years ago when I started doing this, we would never have to represent a church. That would have been a joke, the idea that we have to represent a church. Now, every week, we have to represent another church. The things that we are fighting for now, I think, certainly the founders would have never conceived, but I don't think any of us, even 20 years ago, could ever conceive. So we have got to take this country back. We've got to take these freedoms back and get ourselves back to the country that our founders put in place, where religious freedom is the first freedom that really provides a birth for all freedom that we have in this country.
Kelly Shackelford just talking a little bit about the impact that Point of View had. And, of course, I've known Kelly for, I to admit it now, decades. Knew him when he used to work for a period of time with a man by the name of John Whitehead, and then, of course, later with the Free Market Foundation, now the head, of course, First Liberty. And because of that, we get to have people like Chelsey with us all the time, and Jeremy Dice and all sorts of other individuals that have been working. I know you have some interns this summer, so maybe we'll have them come by one of these days. But this is what you're supporting. When you support this ministry, you're certainly supporting these individuals that actually say, maybe I really could be doing this full time, standing up for religious liberty. And if it was important for Kelly Shackelford decades ago to start what today is now called First Liberty, it's more important than ever before. So again, let me challenge you as we come to the end of the program. You can go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says donate. Of course, you can also give to us off air. That number is 800-347-5151. And Nick, thank you for sitting in
us back here tomorrow.
Nancy was uncomfortable, to say the least. As an introvert, she didn't like controversy. But when she learned that parents were prohibited from seeing the contents of a major standardized test, she knew her responsibilities as a parent needed to outweigh her discomfort. Her daughter turned out to be the only student in her district to opt out of the test, and one of just a handful in the entire state of Texas. But she stood her ground, and the next year, Point of View helped her unite with other parents to make a difference for their children. The world loves to force us into its mold and to mock believers when we resist. Your gift to Point of View is an investment in courage and changed lives. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. Be part of amazing transformations. It all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking in to pointofview.net. One day, you were going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.